very much to Kristen for the nice introduction, and to the Utah State Historical Society for inviting me to speak here today. I'm going to talk about another huge government project that came through and displaced a lot of people and caused a lot of concerns and the loss of a large section of landscape. This book came about because of a couple of things. I was working on my first book. It was called If We Had a Boat, The History of River Running in the Upper Green. And as I read that, I realized there were a lot of accounts people had written as they went down the Green River. Most of the early expeditions started from Green River, Wyoming, rather than Colorado, because you could get to the Green River on a railroad. You know, you could ship your boats there, and you could start, and it was much easier. You know, the rapids from Grand Lake down in the Colorado, for instance, are very difficult. But you could float down through the Green River and reach all the way out to the Grand Canyon. That's where John Charles Fremont started, others before him, Ashley Manley, people like that. So those accounts really struck me as what a beautiful place it was and what an impact it had on those people. So I put an epilogue in that book I called Tailwaves. That was just a little series of quotes about it. That, I would say, kind of swirled around my head like a stick in a knitting. And I thought about it for the next 25 years and always wanted to do more about it and write. And the other thing that motivated me to do it was Glen Canyon. Everybody knows about Glen Canyon, a place no one knew. There are volumes of books written about it. There are documentaries, there are novels, there are films. There are, to this day, people are proposing taking down the dam, kind of thing. But that same kind of thing was not done for the area affected by the Flaming Gorge Dam. There were no novels, no films, no radicals, no group like the Glen Canyon Institute, for instance. So if they were built at the same time, they're similar size, built at the same time, started in 1956, finished around 1963. Not a word. The University of Utah and the Museum of Northern Arizona sent out salvage surveys. The government paid for salvage surveys in Glen Canyon that spent years. I mean, they stayed there right until the waters came up, salvaging the archeology, history, geology, flora, fauna, everything of the Glen Canyon region, and produced shelves of documents, which have been republished by the University of Utah Press. The same thing did not happen in Flaming Gorge. There were plans to do that, but all that they ended up with was one 50-page document that was a history done by a guy named Bill Purdy, and then a couple of documents on archaeology and one on flora and fauna, and that was it. No photographs, no films, no radicals calling for its destruction. So I wanted to change that. All right. The title comes from this quote from Sid Ricketts Sumner, who went down the river in 1955, and this is how I originally wanted to title the book, but the press convinced me otherwise. That we should have a better Lost Canyons of the Green River. So Sid Ricketts Sumner went with Charlie Eggert and Don Hatch on the Eggert-Hatch film expedition in 1955 when they wanted to make the last film before the big dams were built. So they started in Green River, Wyoming, and all the way to the Grand Canyon the next year. And she's talking about, we'll see a picture of it in a minute, she's talking about a place called Carter Creek, which was in Red Canyon. Here's an early map. Actually, even brought my. Here's an early map. This is the 1922 map of the Green, so you can see where it starts. Here's Green River, Wyoming. There's the railroad, and this was all flat water, open country, cottonwood bottoms, mosquitoes, sagebrush, until you got right to the Utah border and you came to Flaming Gorge, and then a series of short canyons, Horseshoe, Kingfisher, and then a long canyon. Right along the spine you went as Red Canyon, and then came out into Browns Park. This is the start of the USGS expedition. In 1922, they had their boats shipped on the rail cars. They just took them off the rail cars and dropped them in the river and went down and got ready at Expedition Island, which is a National Historic Site. And you can still go visit in Green River, Wyoming. This is another launch. This is the Harris-Brennan River Expeditions launch at Green River in 1958. And you can see the butte in the background there. That's a famous fish butte, I think it's called, in Green River, Wyoming. From there, the Green flows through about 70 miles of open country, Badland buttes, cottonwood, willow groves. There were lots of ranches, ferries, bridges, things like that, and as some people noted, lots and lots of mosquitoes. Here they are. This is that same party camped at Scotts Bottom in 1922. This is where Flaming Gorge Reservoir is at maximum pool elevation, MPE. This is the place it reaches to, about 5 miles below the town of Green River, Wyoming. And it's actually now there's a Green River has put in a really nice bike path that goes all the way down to this point, and parks and things. So it's a nice area, but it also covers up that stretch of river. These are the Firehole Towers. This is some hand-tinted ones. The river is now, of course, this about this high. The reservoir is about this high. So these towers are still visible. There were lots of ranches in this area because it was such good open country, and most of them went back and forth across the river. They would have a ferry or they'd build a small bridge. The one that everybody mentions the most is the Holmes Ranch. William and Emma Holmes, who started around the turn of the 20th century and set up a small ranch. They mostly grew vegetables and kind of a truck farm. Holmes was from England, and he was famous for his pouting pigeons that he grew. Emma Holmes did most of the work on the ranch. So everybody talked about how they'd stop there. There was such great hospitality, and that she would tell stories of the outlaws who were in the area. And there's lots and lots of accounts of them. Here's a little film clip. Oh, could you, Peter, since you're right there, would you do the lights?
Sure.
Or Tristan? These are compressed quite a bit. These are compressed quite a bit to get them onto a PowerPoint, so that's why they're a little fuzzy, sorry. This is Emma Holmes. Mr. Holmes died, this is about 1950. Mr. Holmes died about 1946, but Emma stayed there until almost to the end of her life. Here they are exploring around the ranches. This is a Reynolds-Halsey River Expeditions trip. And as I said, a lot of them had ferries, so this is the Holmes Ferry to get back and forth between grazing lands across the river. About halfway between the town of Green River and the little town of Linwood was a Buckboard Hotel. There was a promoter, a guy named Pete Wall, who built a hotel because it took about 2 days on horseback or in a wagon to get from Linwood to Green River, or from Manila to Green River. And so he thought he'd put up a hotel and have parties stay there. As it turned out, by the time he got the hotel built, trucks had been introduced and it only took a day to get in, so it was never really used as a hotel. But people who grew up in the area said that they often used it. They would go there for parties and things, and they would even decorate it for a spook alley and for a Halloween dance for the local residents. This is another of the many ferries along the way. This is the Brinegar Ranch, which was on the other side where Current Creek comes in on the left side of the river as you go down. And Leroy Brinegar, who I talked to a couple of years ago about this, told me quite a bit about the ferry, that they built one and the river washed it away in a big flood. They built another one, and it was, the first one was too small to ferry sheep. The second one was washed away in a big flood, so they built a really big ferry, and it was still there. It was tied up and chained up when the reservoir came up. This is the Williams Ranch at the mouth of Henry's Fork, and this is Barbara Williams here, who was one of my great informants on this. She grew up in that and just kept so many memories of it, and so many photographs and scrapbooks and films and things. She was a great person to get to know on this. The Williams family were very industrious, and they bought this ranch at about 1,000 acres and ran it up until the water came up on the reservoir. Her sister, Pauline, who's quite a bit younger obviously, still runs the Williams family ranch at Minnie's Gap. If you go over Flaming Gorge Dam and then keep going north on the East Flaming Gorge Road, you go right through Minnie's Gap, and that's the ranch right there. The Rasmussen Ranch is called too, but she still runs that. There was also, if you went up Henry's Fork just a couple of miles, there was a little town called Linwood. Linwood was usually about 75 people there, but when they were shearing the sheep, the population would zoom up, and there'd be a lot of people. So it had a post office, a general store, some homes. The other thing it boasted was an octagonal dance floor with a highly polished floor, and the infamous Bucket of Blood saloon. The Bucket of Blood was a haunt of lots of outlaws, because this was such a remote area that outlaws traveled back and forth, and you could get away with, you could go places and not be seen by the law. The Bucket of Blood was also right on the state line, so that the story goes that if Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and those were drinking in the Bucket of Blood saloon, and a sheriff came in one door, they could just go out the back door, and they'd be in Wyoming. So that was also the case with the school. The Linwood School was also built right on the state line. So the story goes, one woman who grew up there said that in Wyoming, in Utah, you couldn't spank kids for being bad, but you could in Wyoming. So if something was bad, they just grabbed them to the other side of the room and administer discipline. There was a guy named Keith Smith moved into the area. He was actually a very well-educated guy from Andover. He'd gone to Andover and Yale. And then his family suffered some reverses, so they decided to start ranching out west to kind of fix that. He moved into the Linwood area about 1900, a little before 1900, and set up a ranch there and became very successful. He started a store, built a bridge, and what he found there was this cabin, Uncle Jack Robinson's cabin. Uncle Jack Robinson was an early trapper who had come west in the 1830s and stayed around the area. What he would do, as the big migrations were coming across, he would take the cattle and the horses and things that had been worn out, and he would bring them down to the really lush bottomlands along the Green River, get them fattened up and healthy again, and then take them back up and sell them to the next party coming through. So he made quite a living doing that. And the cabin is actually one of the oldest buildings in Utah. It was built in 1842. And it survived. When the dam was built, they took the cabin apart and moved it up to, Keith Smith moved up to Flaming Gorge Acres, up by the Flaming Gorge Lodge, and they moved the cabin up there with it, so it's still there. This is the Smith & Larson General Store at Linwood, and George Rasmussen, Minnie Cross Rasmussen, and Mabel Adamson, who was ran the post office. Minnie Cross Rasmussen is really famous as her father was Charlie Krause of Browns Park fame, the one who would keep horses and sell them to the Wild Bunch when they came back and forth. And he was a supply of horses of the Wild Bunch. A very interesting character of Browns Park history. Here's Linwood in 1960. This is after it's kind of been condemned, and they know the water's coming up. Another view. You can pretty much get the same view, except now it's all full of water, of course, by climbing up on the hill above the Highway 191. Below Henry's Fork, the green abruptly ended a series of short canyons, Flaming Gorge, Horseshoe, and Kingfisher Canyon. They were all really short. None of them was over a mile or 2 miles long, but they were very different because of the complex geology in the area. That's right where the Uinta Mountains have been pushed up by the laramide orogeny. So you have all these layers, these sedimentary layers that are just pushed up vertically when you drive through them. If you ever do the Sheep Creek, go up there, do the Sheep Creek drive, the scenic drive, and it's really, really beautiful and really shows you that geology. Frederick Dellenbaugh said here, Flaming Gorge is the gateway, Horseshoe the vestibule, and Kingfisher the antechamber to the whole grand series. The first Flaming Gorge, Powell named it because of the red color of the rocks. And it's a very short canyon, about a mile long, but at high water, and the green in those days, of course, now we're used to the limpid stream that comes out from under the dam, and it's nice and clear, and you can see things underneath it. In those days, though, the green could run up to 20,000 CFS when it flooded. The CFS is cubic feet per second. And the green now runs probably sometimes 800 CFS. In those days, if the green flooded at 20,000 CFS, it was a huge muddy flood, and it would knock out trees, take out whole rows of cottonwood trees, wash away bridges, ferries, ranch houses, cattle. And when it all kind of piled into the narrow entrance at Flaming Gorge, all of a sudden it would just create these huge swirling whirlpools, and it gave rise to a legend that they called the Green River Suck, that mountain men said was this huge cataract, that nobody could survive. Even though there was no such thing, but the water was very turbulent. Barbara Williams said that they used to have to drive their cattle, when the water was high, they'd have to drive their cattle about 10 miles upstream to get them across, because one time they lost a couple of prize bulls trying to swim them across. The water was too turbulent, it sucked them in and drowned them. So, the Green River Suck. Here's another shot of Flaming Gorge. This is 1909, taken by Raymond Cogswell on the Galloway Stone Expedition. Horseshoe Canyon, Ralph Woolley wrote, the gray shades of the rock with the generous sprinkling of pines and the river winding its way between the walls form a constantly changing panorama. Woolley was an engineer on the USGS survey, the Utah Power and Light and USGS survey for dam sites, and normally wrote a very just passionate engineering kind of voice. But in this case, he was moved by the beauty of the area. Horseshoe Canyon is just a big, long view. Here's a good shot of it. And you can actually, the water's probably up about right here now. You can still see this fault line here, and these trees going up. If you go up to there and go down into the Flaming Gorge Reservoir. Between Horseshoe and Kingfisher Canyon was Ole Nielsen's cabin, and this is actually Keith Smith here in his Andover shirt, sweater from 1902. Ole Nielsen was a local guy who helped Keith get set up, and he ran a sawmill, which actually was killed in a sawmill accident in 1922. But his wife, here, Mrs. Nielsen, while Keith was living there while they were building their cabin, One day he came home, he said, and there was his, Ole Nielsen's wife smoking one of his really fine cigars. And so he asked her about it, and she said, well, the baby crawled over and was sucking on it, and I didn't want to take it away. So, smoked it now. Okay, Kingfisher Canyon, short and rapid free, beautiful canyon, full of kingfishers. This is the belted kingfisher. Powell named this because there were so many of these birds along there that he called it Kingfisher Canyon. He actually originally called Sheep Creek, which is, this is the mouth of Sheep Creek, Kingfisher Creek, Kingfisher Park. So, this is my wife's favorite part, this top. It's easy to see. And then farther down to Kingfisher, you can see how different the geology is. It really changes as you go down. And the Kingfisher Canyon was beehive rock at the end of it. Powell called it that because there were so many swallows. It reminded him of a beehive. So many swallow nests in the rock itself. Below there, of course, too, was a place called Hideout Flat, where that was where a trail crossed the river, and there was actually a road that went down. The CCT built a road down, but there was an earlier trail, and it was called Hideout Flat because that was one of the favorite outlaw trails. Or Indians before that, of course, were the outlaw trails. The Cole brothers, when they came down in 1911, they talked about somebody, they were going by there, and somebody motioned them over. They saw a guy on the shore who waved them over, so they stopped. And he said, well, would you help us get this herd of horses across the river? And they said, oh, sure. So they used their boats to help herd the horses across. And then the people turned suspicious, so they left. They went down to Browns Park, and they asked what was going on. And they said, oh, you just helped him steal a herd of horses. So now below that is Red Canyon. Red Canyon is where the river comes right up against the spine of the Uintas, and the geology changes again to really dense, hard, Precambrian rock in the Uinta Mountain quartzite. And that hard rock means hard rapids. This is the view from the Red Canyon overlook before the dam was built. And you can still see the same view, sort of. I mean, the water's up in here now, but you can go up to the Red Canyon overlook, and it's a really nice view up there. One of the features of Red Canyon were rapids. Before that, there weren't really any rapids. There were riffles and gravel bars and stuff. But after that, you started running into big rapids. And this is Skull Creek, was one of the biggest rapids. This is where Theodore Hook drowned in 1869, right before he was trying to get a march on John C. Powell. And got there early, flipped his boat, drowned in the river, and was buried down at Browns Park. Here's a view downriver from just below Skull Creek. Another characteristic, though, it wasn't all doom and gloom and big rapids. It was these beautiful side canyons like Carter Creek. This is a hand-tuned slide from 1922. And there are quite a few of these. Eagle Creek, Trail Creek, Carter Creek, Skull Creek had these beautiful side canyons coming in with clear water full of trout. Here's the French kayakers in 1938 stopping to get a drink. Instead of the muddy water of the river, they're getting a drink out of Carter Creek. Genevieve Coleman and Antoine Saint. But below there, when you saw the cliffs come down to the river like this, you knew it was almost Ashley Falls. Ashley Falls was the biggest rapid on the Green River, and it was one where everybody worried about it. As they're writing in their journals going down, oh, we're worried about Ashley Falls. And it was kind of a milestone. Once you got past Ashley Falls, the Cole brothers, for instance, waited until they got below there to paint their names on their boats. That's kind of they felt like they kind of arrived. So it was also where William Ashley was portaging his boats in 1825, his bull boats on an exploration trip for fur trapping, and he carved and painted his name in the rocks there. Frederick Dellenbaugh saw this when they were portaging in 1871. He saw this and made a sketch of it, and that's the only notice of it. Unfortunately, that became a river register where people painted their names, carved their names, lots and lots of people, and it was never really documented, unfortunately. There were a few photographs taken, but not all that many. This is Powell and his men, June 5th, 1871, portaging Ashley Falls. And you can imagine their boats weighed about 1,000 pounds, double-ribbed oak boats, 21 feet long. Getting those boats around this rapid was a real difficult task. Here's Nathaniel Galloway's journal in September 18th, 1909. He's the first documented run. Other people probably maybe have, but Nathaniel Galloway was there in the 1880s. Was one of the first to run it. I always loved his spelling, where he talks about running directly toward the large cubular rock in the center. This is him doing just that. This is Ashley Falls at low water. At low water, you ran it to the right. At high water, you ran it to the left. And we have actually I didn't bring that clip, but you can see why in some of the clips we've seen. This is another low water view of it, and the inscriptions were all over these rocks over here, on either side, above the rapid and below it. Here's the Reynolds Halsey in 1950, checking it out at high water, doing a scout from up high. And here's A.K. Reynolds running it in 1950. That's the big left side run. There was just one big drop. On the right side at high water, there were these big lateral waves coming at an odd angle. And that was real tricky to run. At high water on the left, you just had one big drop. We'll see. So this is a little clip from Wayne McConkey on our Mexican hat expedition trip in 1956. He starts out with a little view of Flaming Gorge. Again, sorry these are so fuzzy, but we had to compress them way down to get them into a PowerPoint. This is, can't see, but here we are in Horseshoe Canyon again, and then next, running Ashley Falls. Yeah, just that one big drop on the left side there. And you can get right up above it on those rocks where the inscriptions were. Here comes another guy, and he just about gets launched off the boat. If he hadn't held on to the oars, he would have gone right over the front. And then the third boat's coming down. This guy, you can see, he gets surfed off to the left. You can see all of a sudden he realizes, whoa, what's going to happen? Bang, into the rocks. And they're bouncing back out into that soft water below it. Here's some of the inscriptions there. Holmes from 1938, Langley expeditions, this was with Bus Hatch. Here's Galloway in 1909, Galloway and Stone. McClarty, this was in the 1950s. One thing that, besides that, the inscriptions was that Ashley Falls was actually a really easy run. People didn't realize that. It looked really intimidating, it looked really big, but below it was a big, long pool. And so that's how rapid rating systems, if there's an ease of rescue below it, that lowers the rating. And so even though it looked really difficult, people actually could run it really easily. They plow through, they think we're done, and then they go down and wreck their boats at Red Creek Rapid. Right below there, one of the dam sites chosen by, there were 17 dam sites chosen by the USGS survey in 1922. One of them was just below the mouth of Cart Creek, and that was Flaming Gorge Dam. After the Echo Park Dam was defeated in the 1950s, the Flaming Gorge Dam was always on the drawing board, but after the Echo Park Dam was defeated, suddenly they had to hurry up and build Flaming Gorge to replace it, and they also raised the height of Glen Canyon Dam to help replace the water that would have been stored in the Echo Park Dam. Construction began in 1956 and completed in 1963. Here's some of the preliminary work. And they built it on this curve so they could put the diversion tunnel through there. So the first thing you have to do when you do this is build a coffer dam. You have to build diversion tunnels, then you build a dirt coffer dam to divert the water through so you can de-water the site. So you can start building the dam. Here's the diversion tunnels. They built a bridge. This is right by Ashley Falls. Here they're building the road in. This is actually building the coffer dam. It's just rocks and dirt shoved into the river to divert the water through the diversion tunnels. Here's from Arch Dam Constructors. They were the big contractor. This is a Christmas card that Barbara Williams found and sent. Here's the coffer dam. This is in the winter. And the diversion tunnel is completed. Another thing they did was both to salvage the timber and to make sure that in the completed reservoir there weren't big trees sticking up to the water, because this is a very heavily forested area. They sent out crews who went down to the kind of the lowest level of the reservoir and chopped down all the trees. And then they roll them down into the river and float them down in a big raft to a sawmill that was right by Ashley Falls. This is Ashley Falls. And so you get this weird denuded barrel. And a guy who worked on that, who was in charge of the sawmill up in Manila, I gave a talk there one time, said that they brought in one Douglas fir tree that was 15 feet across at the base and 150 feet tall. So just amazing lumber came out of there. Here's the dam, almost completed. This is a really good shot of the coffer dam too. Right after they started this and they built the coffer dam and opened the diversion tunnels in 1957 rather, there was a huge flood down the river, just a major flood all down the Colorado, and they were worried about the cofferdam holding, but it did. But one of the things that was under the water would have been Linwood, so they had to bulldoze the whole town and burn them because they didn't want the houses coming loose and floating around in the reservoir. So a lot of people were displaced. There was a lot of ill feeling, and there still is to this day about this. And they offered to move any buildings people wanted to. Some people didn't want to do that. Others just weren't able to do it. So this is the destruction of Linwood.
Well, the day came when water from the lake could be released through the dam to make electricity. Turbines and generators had been installed in the power plant, and everything was checked to make sure it was ready to go. Then the big day came. Over in Salt Lake City, President Kennedy arrived to start the first generator. While at the dam, 150 miles away, engineers waited for his signal to throw the switch.
But the important thing to remember is for 50 years, men have been talking about this project. It's now a reality. What are we going to do now so that 50 years from now,
Right now.
the people who live in Utah and the United States will feel that in the early 60s, we made the proper decision for the management of our resources. Water is the key. The management of water, I think, is the key that will open a very bright future. And therefore, I will now take action which will start the first generator at Flaming Gorge Dam. I never know when I press these whether it means we're going to blow up the assumption that we are going to start the generator.
When the president pushes the buzzer, we will wait then to hear from Mr. Walton over the loudspeaker, who will report on what the generator does. And thus you'll know, Mr. President, whether you blew it up or not.
Back to the drawing board. Again.
This is almost like steampunk. I mean, it's so retro.
Mr. President, the generator is now running at full speed.
And there you have it, Flaming Gorge Dam. Viewed from one of the viewpoints. It cost $115 million, 502 feet high, 1,180 feet long along the base, the crest rather, 131 feet thick, 987,000 cubic yards of concrete. The reservoir is 97 miles long and has close to 4 million acre feet. That's the standard measure of water. And at maximum pool elevation, which it reached in August 1974, it's 42,000 acres in surface area, and it generates 151 megawatts. And actually, that's improvements they made since. Originally it was only about 60 megawatts, but since then they've made improvements and it generates more. Here's from one of the, you go over the dam and then go over to one of the viewpoints. This is Cedar Springs Marina, and this is Mustang Ridge Marina, and this is the location of Ashland Falls. So it's under about 500 feet of water. This is Antelope, the boat ramp at Antelope. I took this 3 years ago. And the Firewall Towers, this really, it doesn't look all that much different, but the cottonwood bottoms along the river. And here's that same viewpoint that we saw earlier from the Red Canyon Overlook. You can see that same viewpoint. This is looking upriver. And here's Linwood. This is the monument going into, if you go to the Lucerne Marina, you take off a little road, and this is the Linwood Monument. there's a map on this of all the buildings of Linwood kind of, that this is where Linwood was out of here. This has gone out called Linwood Bay. One guy told me that he was out there fishing, and all along the shore, those big burned timbers, which must have come from the houses in Linwood. A permit for Lador and the river was running like 14,000 CFS, and so I had this romantic weekend planned with my wife. So I did that instead of going on a trip with these guys. I won't say I regretted it, but I don't tell her that certainly. But it is something to see. Lador is quite a bit different when the water gets high. In April of 2011, I went over to take some pictures of it running. This is 2 years ago, June of 2011 in Lador, when they were letting out 12,000 CFS. This boat going over, this is in Triplet Rapid. This is my daughter and I in the front of this boat. After this boat, we got this pulled over to shore and turned back over the boat, and I noticed her holding her arm, and her arm started to swell really bad. So they all looked at me and said, "You've got to run this 2,000 mile." So we did, my daughter and I did, and it was very, very adventurous. So let's let the river have the last word here. Just gives you an idea of the power backed up behind the dam there. All right, thank you very much.